Yes.
All right, here we go. We're recording right now. Hello, everyone, and good day wherever you are. I'm Rick Zanotti, and joining me right to my left over here is Dawn Mahoney. Hi, Dawn. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
I'm good. We had a little bit of an audio issue earlier. It seems like we're okay now. Dawn, where are you located today?
I am in Westlake, which is a western suburb of Cleveland. Got here about 45 minutes before we were to start the show, so
Beautiful
I'm a
Cleveland.
little travel-worn.
It happens. Traveling is fun.
And this is your third show of the day. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'll collapse later. No, I'm actually fine. It's fun. Anyway, Dawn, we've got a guest today that you know, a special guest. Tell us a little bit about him.
Well, I'll admit that he's a Twitter contact, just like you are, Rick, someone I haven't met in person yet. But Reuben Tozman is on, and he has a book out, published by ASTD Press came out in October, Learning on Demand, and I'm anxious to hear more about it. So welcome.
Welcome, Reuben. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I am doing well, and you're in Toronto today.
I'm in Toronto. Yep.
Beautiful city. Everyone's there.
You mentioned how you might have your kids join us. That'd be great.
Yeah, you can expect a loud ruckus, I'm going to say, in about 10-15 minutes.
What happens then?
They might barge in, they might not. Mommy might have them under control.
Oh, is it time to come home from school, or?
It is.
It is.
It is.
It's time to tell you about their day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're 4 and 3, so they're fairly rambunctious.
You know all about observing learning then, and on demand, as it were.
I do.
So what was the impetus for the book, and tell us more about all of that.
Well, the impetus for the book, it actually started, community manager for ASTD was in a session with Allison Rossett, and I was having a discussion with Allison about something she was talking about, and he came up to me after the session and said, hey, interesting views. Have you ever thought about writing articles or stuff? And at the time I had written a few articles and said, truth is I got an idea for a book. And we talked about it, and I think ASTD took a shot with this one because I don't think it's necessarily in line with some of their other books, but it's been something that's been brewing for the last 10 years or so.
10 years? That's a long time.
10 years, yeah.
Did you know you had a whole book in you when you started?
I'm going to say no. The thought of writing a book at the time was pretty intimidating. I know that I have lots of opinions. I didn't necessarily think they were coherent opinions, but I knew I could be opinionated.
And the on-demand part is the part that really grabbed my attention. So tell us, because I'll admit I have not read your book yet. I don't know if Rick has. So
I haven't,
tell
but
us
I'll be
more
buying
about
it.
your book.
Well, when I started in the e-learning world, the CBT world, was probably 97. At the time, I was an instructional designer for a multimedia company. And I tell this story in the book of my first project. This company had never done computer-based training before. They had a client that wanted them to do it, and they hired someone with a title called instructional designer. They didn't know what that was. And by virtue of that fact, being the instructional designer with a company that had never done it before, I was given a whole lot of power And I probably single-handedly turned what would have been a 3-month project into about a 2-year project.
Wow.
And it was really about, it was a colossal failure. But along the way, I really learned about design and development and how it happens and the people that are involved. And, I went on, eventually had another job, but eventually became a product manager for a company that had a services company as well as an off-the-shelf product company. And I was running the off-the-shelf part of the company. And what I realized in that process was building off the shelf was obviously a lot easier because there was a ton of stuff that was already decided before you ever built anything. And yes, the graphic user interface was done, and you had kind of all your interactions laid out, and so the build was much easier. But really, the big time savings was in the instructional design piece because you had a way of, you already knew what designs you were going to apply to what types of performance outcomes. So you already had mapped, I'm going to use this interaction when I need to design something for this type of outcome. And so when I started Etc. Training, and it was going to be a services business, typically in a services business, you need to scale up for the amount of projects that you have. So if you have 2 projects, it requires double the developers. And if that project is 2 hours long versus 1 hour long, you need more people because the amount of reuse is very little because designers are always designing for the kind of optimal outcome. And so that's a process known as information mapping. I didn't invent it. But what I did was I used that information mapping process and used what's called the structured content development model to run my development process, which essentially means that I let machines build my courses for me, that I don't need the same amount of human intervention to do that. I tell content what it is, and then I build processing that builds the courses for me based on what that content is. And in doing all of that, kind of setting that up and building my own tools and kind of figuring all that stuff out, what happened is that when I allowed machines to start building stuff for me, because all I did was I told content, hey, you're for this type of learner, this is the context when you're used, this is how you need to be displayed if you're displayed on a regular browser, this is how you need to be displayed if you're on a mobile browser. And I kind of marked that all up. What I realized was that I was able to deliver content to people on demand because now content was intelligent. And at the time, I didn't know that a whole kind of industry existed around intelligent content or what that was. I had kind of come to it simply by trying to solve a service problem. And when I realized that there was a whole industry around it, I went in and I explored and found that that whole industry, structured content, intelligent content, was something that you don't see in our world and something that has changed everything on the web except our world, and it's probably most applicable to our world. So the book is really about that, if that made any sense. See?
Yeah, that did make sense.
Opinionated, not coherent.
I will actually be buying that book. That sounds real interesting,
right.
Actually. Now, did you develop tools to actually allow you to create the training from the content?
Yes, I'm fascinated by that same thing.
Yeah, so we built, it was interesting. So we started off working with a third-party content management system, and it was an XML-based system. But what we would do is we would build these content structures, they're called, so it's an XML schema, for every new project that we started. So if we were working with software training, and we had a lot of performance outcomes where users had to be able to do X and actually fulfill a system transaction. That translates into the online world as a lot of simulations. But really, if you compare that against, an orientation course where the performance outcomes aren't necessarily as strong or as hard-coded into what you're building, you typically build a different type of structure to support that. And so as we work with different clients and different types of courses, we built these different structures. And then one day, we actually started a project, and we created an open source project and got some other people involved, where we created an open source markup language for learning called Structured Learning Markup Language. And then we built our own content management system that helped us use that language.
Wow.
And those are the two big pieces that we've built.
I'm thinking back to 97, 98, 99 when I was developing CBTs. They were authorware point and click, and you were actually talking about interactions. Good for you.
Yeah, when I started, HyperCard was all the rage. So that's pre-authorware, pre-director even.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
We've
I remember.
all been there, and then we had Robo.
That's right.
Lest we forget.
Are you talking Robo Demo?
Robo Demo, Robo Help.
Robo Help, yeah.
Yeah, we started with Robo Help. Early adopters after authorware, we used Robo.
Now I remember back in
were
those.
Were yours CDs that you mailed?
Now back in those days, what we did is we used authorware among other tools, but we developed a knowledge object for authorware that actually generated about 80 to 90% of our course. It wasn't the same as on demand. We still had to create the course, create the content, then it would pump it in there. So it was a little bit different. But it would save a lot of time in creating courseware. But now this tool, do you guys still market that tool? Do you sell the tool? Is that?
We do. So we're a little bit off the radar. We have a reseller in the U.S. that sells it for us. But we generally, we're a small company, and for us to kind of grab the resources it needs to go out and really market it and sell it and do all that stuff, we just don't have those resources. So if there are, very few folks in the online training, online learning, however you want to call it, world, that want an XML-based system. And if they do, there's Xyleme, which is a very well-known system, which is way more mature and way more robust than anything that we've got. It's also way more expensive. But if you're in that world and that's a product that you're going to look at and think is the cat's meow sort of thing. So we don't actively market our tool. We have clients that use it. We're kind of happy with it. We built it more for ourselves than we did to market it.
Okay.
So is it still available through open source?
The language is available. So you can download, you can go to sourceforge.com and look up SLML, and you can download the content structure itself. And we've also created something, it's called an SPS file that allows you to use Altova's authentic XML editor to work with the content.
And I ask for lots of reasons, but we do have a global audience that reach in and watch the show asynchronous, when we're not live. So be good for them to be able to access through open source.
Yep.
Sourceforge.com. Yep. I typed it into the chat pod.
Cool.
What else do you want us to know? This is exciting. Someone asked me again recently to write a book. Tell us about the process of writing a book.
I'm going to say that, and it was funny, I was just talking to Carl Kapp, who has his gamification book that came out around the same time. And he's written many books. And let me just say this, that it's so freaky having personal conversations with Carl Kapp, because when I was an MA student, he's a guy that we had to read a lot of. Anyways, that being said, the hardest part about writing a book in that process was having to live inside your own head for, for months on end. And I absolutely despised myself. I'm going to say, 3 months into the process, I wish I could have just shut up because it was the same ideas just going over and over, and the publisher would send you back the stuff that you'd write and you'd have to read it over and over. And seriously, after a time, you're like, I just want to talk about something else. Like, someone has to get me out of this because I'm having the same conversations. And when you go to the pre-promotion of the book and the articles that you write, all are on the same topic, and it became very difficult for me to finish the book off because I was just so sick of myself and hearing the same stuff.
It was all geek all the time, wasn't it?
What's that?
It's all geek author all the time.
Yeah, it was really something. I mean, I work in the fields. The stuff that I write in the book are the same conversations that I have with people. They're the same topics that I present when I go to conferences. They're the same things I talk about with my clients. And so, yeah, it just became overwhelming to hear myself talk and think. And that was by far the most difficult part. Other than that, I think, I'd write another one. I probably have a much better idea of what to expect and how to go about doing it. But I thought, I got it done within 4 months, at least that initial draft. And
I think that's fast, isn't it, considering you have a day job too?
Yes, and 2 young kids. And so I had a very patient wife for 4 months.
And how long from your initial draft, or when was that? You told us it came out in October last year, so 4 months ago. But how long before that? What's the lead time? Jane Bozarth mentioned that a few weeks ago when we talked to her, that it was like 9 months, 10 months.
Yeah, so my first draft was done end of January of 2012, and it was published October 2012.
So roughly the same time frame. She was saying, because she was doing PowerPoint tips and so forth, that whole new versions of PowerPoint came out by the time the book hit the shelves. So.
Yeah, for sure. My last chapter deals with case studies and examples of companies both inside L&D and outside L&D who are using the technologies that I talk about in the book. And yeah, I mean, I wish that I had gotten a few in there that I learned about after the cutoff date. So, for sure.
That's the world we live in. Look in your crystal ball and hope most of it will be stable.
Yeah, and if you look at most tech books nowadays, you notice if you go to a Barnes & Noble or any kind of big bookstore, there's less and less and less of physical books because nobody's putting them out like they used to, because software is changing so quickly. The books are outdated within 6 months. It's really rather irritating. And I guess we haven't really come up with the new paradigm, short of ebooks, to adapt to the quick turnaround cycles of software. And by the way, my theory is software should not turn around that fast. One, it's too buggy usually to be really released so quickly in a row, and it doesn't give people time to learn the previous version of the software to at least get good at it. So I think the software shifts are just a little too quick right now. What do you guys think?
I remember Windows 95 was really good in 99 and 2000.
I'm going to say that part of that whole software release is the rise of the lean startup. Mm-hmm. So software manufacturers, anyone that builds technology, wants to put it in the hands of the people that are going to use it as quickly as possible, so that they can go ahead and do all their rev cycles. So yes, I mean, I think Microsoft invented the paradigm of saying the general public will be my quality assurance testers, and we'll kind of bug fix from there. We'll release kind of what's absolutely necessary, and then we'll let the general public test for us, and then we'll release new versions and all that stuff. I never really thought about it being bad. I just kind of assume that that's the way the world is at this point.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad for the real hotshot developers or the people who really know their stuff. I think it's a bad for the majority of people who aren't that typical hotshot developer, who take a little longer to learn the products, and then all of a sudden there's a new one. And the new one's not necessarily much better than the old one, because what we're having are incremental updates now that update little things. And half the vendors don't even tell you what they've updated, which is always fun, too. Then you got to kind of do some digging and exploring. So it's just an interesting thing. In the learning community, I noticed that, well, actually, in the learning community, for the most part, releases are a little slower. The software vendors, I'd say there's about a year to year and a half cycle between releases, which is probably good. People adapt to it pretty quickly. Releases, and they're really more bug fixes with a couple of new features here and there thrown in to make people feel good.
Yeah, so one of the things about my book, other than the last chapter, it's pretty, it's fairly technology neutral. I mean, the kind of main thesis in the book is if you're going to develop content for the web has a value system in it that has made, I hear my kids laughing.
It's fine.
that has made the web what it is. And if you want to develop valuable content online, if you go outside of training and development, there is a fairly well-established system that have all contributed to the development of the web as it is. And so it's looking at those patterns and saying, okay, if you want to make valuable learning content, let's kind of toss out the idea of return on investment and that stuff, and let's think about how can this content be valuable to the people that need it. The web can tell you how to do that as long as you don't listen to training and development. And so I look at what those things are and talk about those, and all those things have been around since day one of the web. So.
Yeah, and the web is definitely much more fluid, so we do see that.
Yeah, there's, I use the example of ICQ, and when ICQ came out, I think everyone was kind of scratching their heads about how is this company ever going to make money. Everyone was thinking, well, they're definitely going to throw ads in there, and at some point they're going to charge you, and everyone had a theory about how ICQ was going to make money. And the truth is ICQ kind of had everything built into it for it to go viral, because you couldn't use it unless you shared it. It was freely given away, and it sold for $407 million. And so you got to wonder, well, how did ICQ get that value if it never earned a penny? And that's where, if you look at the web and how the web has become valuable to us, and I always ask this question to people in my sessions about what's more valuable, the web or the corporate intranet, and everyone obviously raises their hand for the web being more valuable. And you look at it, well, what makes the web more valuable? Is it because everything's neatly in file folders and everyone's done their job in terms of tagging and all that stuff? And of course the answer is no. And yet people spend inordinate amounts of time trying to stuff things into the right file folders and their corporate intranets, and the more content you shove into a corporate intranet, the more useless it becomes. And it's the exact opposite on the web. And so if you look at learning management systems, the more things I put into a learning management system built with things like Articulate, Lector, and whatever, give it 2 years, and all that stuff has lost its value entirely. The LMS becomes one big mess. You can't find anything. You don't know where anything is. You go to the web, and you see that anybody can contribute to the web, that there's no hierarchy of things, there's no administration of it, there's none of these things, and yet it is infinitely more valuable. And so you got to ask yourself, well, why is that? What are the things that make that web valuable? And I think once you start to look at those things, and you can take those things and apply them to what you're building in terms of learning content, I hate that expression, but those things that you're building into your content, there are ways to make content valuable.
Yeah, and the web is so much more organic. It tends to kind of grow in and of itself, whereas learning content really doesn't, at least in corporate content. It tends to just be very static.
Yeah, well, so the technology that we use to build content for our world creates a big black box around the content. Mm-hmm. So it's compiled code, computers, it's non-machine readable, machines can't make sense of it other than the ridiculous metadata that we surround it with. And in that world, in that way of doing things, that content, for one, is, and this is another idea kind of I talked about in the book, which is when we create content, learning content, ultimately we're taking a snapshot of our organization in a specific time. And we capture that knowledge or that information about whatever it is we're training, and we capture that knowledge into this black box, and we then put that in a silo called the learning management system, which isn't at all tied to any other systems within our business. It's not tied to Salesforce. It's not tied to any other systems. And so you've now taken that chunk of information and totally taken it out of its context and out of the organization, where that organization continues to grow and evolve. You now have a very stale piece of content that machines don't understand, nor can they update by themselves. And that makes that piece of content similar to an oxygen tank going up Mount Everest, where it's valuable for a very short period of time. Once you're done with it, you throw it away, and it stays as garbage, until someone comes and removes it.
Well, like somebody once said, the learning management system is there to manage the learning, not to teach, not to do anything otherwise than just to manage it. That's it.
Yeah, and it's useless.
It's useless.
Well, Leva brought up, Leva comes to us from Belgium. I don't know if you knew that, but she said, why are we still using an LMS? Is that just to limit access to content?
It's.
I think, well, so one is you still have compliance and auditing to deal with, and the learning management system is the easiest way to do that. Now, the compliance training really has nothing to do with learning, and it has nothing to do with actually teaching people anything valuable. Compliance training is generally done for the auditor as opposed to the people taking.
And, well, you're in
training.
Canada. Here, it's for the lawyers, only lawyers.
Right.
Yep.
Correct. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah. And so the learning management system administrates that very well. And until now, there hasn't been another paradigm to build a different type of system. I was at DevLearn 2012. There's a company called Curator, Curatr, and they have an extremely interesting model about how they're kind of organically managing content based on tracks and paths and all that good stuff. So that's the first system that I've seen in years that rethought the learning management system.
Isn't that the theory behind Tin Can as well?
Yeah, Tin Can, and I went to a couple of sessions at the ASTD show. Tin Can is simply a specification for tracking and storing data. That's it. But
data
what it does is that until now, we've been given a data set borrowed from a classroom about how to supposedly measure what we call learning. So SCORM itself didn't decide that, hey, we're going to choose scores and we're going to choose completions and all that stuff for our data set. That came from the classroom. They just made that interoperable. What Tin Can does is it doesn't give you a data set. It says go ahead and create your own data set. So if you don't want to track scores and you want to track, how many times someone clicks a button, you can do that. If you want to track whether people are having a conversation as some valuable measurement of something, then you can do that. So Tin Can simply just opens the door and puts the power in the designer's hand to say, track whatever you want to track. And if you're going to do it, here's a consistent way to do that. Whereas SCORM gave us those data sets.
Right, it makes much more sense. Including that.
Well, and it's supposed to be learner-centric, but what'll remain to be seen in our industry of learning and development, or whatever moniker, workplace learning and performance, is whether organizations, especially large organizations, will allow learners to actually set those metrics for themselves. Will they or won't they? I wonder, because back to the compliance argument and so forth.
I don't know if it's learners setting their own metrics. It goes to the designer. So, and here's a great example, and I have a couple of examples on my blog of like real life kind of tin can stories. The most recent one is we had someone come to us and say, hey, can you build us some sales training? And this was for an insurance company that underwrites the extended warranties on cars and such. And they said we need to basically build a program for our dealership network that can help the dealers sell more extended warranties. And so when we said, well, what's the objective ultimately of doing this training? They said, well, we need people to make more sales. To which we said, well, we can't do that. There's no way that we can really affect sales. There's far too much going on. I mean, we don't know things like, do people buy the extended warranty based on the car that they purchase? Do they, what if someone's having a bad day? What is compensation like around sales? There's all kinds of factors that we can't control. But what we did say to them is, well, look, I mean, the information that you want to put in the course is just a bunch of information about the product, and there's a lot of legal stuff about what it is. That's all very good for a PDF. And so we said, well, why don't we build you a tool that can allow salespeople to monitor their sales? In other words, build a mobile app, build browser-based app, where every time they make a sale or lose a sale, they kind of answer some basic questions about that sale. Did they, what kind of car did the person buy? Did the customer seem like they were pissed off that day? Was it male, female? Was it, just a little bit of statistics on sales. And then we said what we are essentially going to do is we're going to associate resources with the different types of outcomes so that people can figure out where they're strong and where they're weak. And if there's information about, hey, if a customer isn't buying this type of car and it's more difficult, here are some tips about how to sell to that customer. They may work, they may not. But all of a sudden, we said we want to essentially give your salespeople a tool that exposes them to their own data and exposes them to the data about all the other salespeople, where now they can see their own patterns about where they're good, where they're bad, and we can associate resources to those different things that now someone can self-improve. And of course, well, I say of course, but the person that we spoke to loved this idea. Well, we're going to use data as the experience itself. So now, I get to see as time goes on, I get to improve and I have access to resources. So all of a sudden this brought up, okay, well, we already have kind of a tool where people are reporting their sales. And so we said, great, well, we need to speak to IT so that we can get whoever owns that software to put in a little bit of JavaScript so we can collect tin can statements so we can build this tool that we're talking about. And then, of course, the brick wall of IT came up. But again, it wasn't the learner saying this would be valuable for me. It was us as the designers coming back and saying, let's use Tin Can as a way to capture data and use that data as a learning experience itself and allow that experience to continue to build and evolve. But what it also did was it put training and development at the same level as any other business software application. It made us very real. It also put an end to the idea because IT was never going to let it happen. But it did raise the bar of what we wanted to accomplish.
Well, and it puts it back on, I assume it was some sort of CRM, and if they were recording good information in the sales management system, whatever it is, then the reporting should have been good, so you could have been able to have those conversations. I wonder if that got better also going forward.
Well, what we ultimately wanted to do was, if the data was being captured, we wanted to expose the data differently than what it might have appeared in the application itself. And the whole moniker of API after Tin Can, or the Experience API, is that you can make that data portable. That's ultimately what we wanted to do. We know it was collecting the data. We just wanted to throw something in there to say, when you capture this data, throw it to this other application where we'll do something different with it. But yeah, I mean, that's for me, Tin Can. I mean, that's what's exciting about it, is that you can start to have those conversations with people that are fairly meaningful.
Yep. And with that, we are at the end of a show. We've been on about 45 minutes. Reuben, this was good. This is a good conversation. I think we need to have you on again to further get into some of these points, because they're very valid. It really kind of cries to the crux of all the issues that we have right now. And we have a lot of issues in this industry. So I think that's true. And I like your comments on LMS. We've been through it. I keep saying, where in the world would an LMS cost more than your ERP system that runs your whole company? Makes no sense. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
Before I even knew the difference of all of those, I would ask the question, why don't these talk to each other? And the IT people would look at me like I had three heads. And then the next savior was going to be a learning content management system, because that was going to be better, because then we'd have contacts and metrics. It's still a problem.
It is.
It doesn't.
And now you've got knowledge, and now you've got knowledge management, but it doesn't really manage much knowledge. So they're nice buzzwords.
Right. Yep.
We to put a finger in the page for our next visit, there was a question about what about Mozilla Open Badges, and of course Mozilla is open source again, so that's kind of another iteration of this whole learner planning their own way.
Yeah, Open Badges is an interesting project, and I just responded to a Twitter conversation just before this conversation, and I said, just like anything else, the value of a badge is going to be on the buyer. So if you don't value badges, when someone says, hey, look at my badges, then who cares?
Right.
If you think badges are great, then they're going to have value.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to say, we don't need no stinking badges. Probably.
We don't need no stinking badges. Yeah.
This was very interesting. I'm so glad we were able to work this out to have a show today, even though it was at a weird time, but it worked out best for you, and I'm appreciative of that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Sure.
And
will we see you at ICE in Dallas?
You will see me at ICE.
Okay, we'll meet in person then. Maybe
Awesome.
at a tweet up, or are you going to be at the bookstore?
I will be at the bookstore. My book's there. I'll be doing a book signing, I'm sure, at some point.
Okay, so we'll make a plan to meet in person there.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you so much.
sounds good.
Thanks,
I noticed, Rick, you were showing Rick Altman's page a moment ago.
Rick Altman's page?
Better Presenting. That's who's on the show next Wednesday.
Okay, well, that's what delayed the show. Listen, they were all in the same record.
Oh, well, that was
And
the changing of the calendar, probably.
Okay.
But we can talk about that
All
offline.
right, sorry about that. So, I shake head.
But Anand was shown as well. So
Yep,
thank you
it was
so
a
much.
lot.
Thanks for being in the chat room, John and Leva. It was good to have you there.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Reuben.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
He's gone.
Okay, and I've got some work.